When looking at new podcasts for something to listen to on your podcast player, sometimes one just stands out. For me, it was quite a few years ago when the title, But What Do I Know?, grabbed my attention. It was nominated for a podcast award, and it really resonated with me because the imposter syndrome behind that question, my need for continual learning, and also learning from a fellow Canadian, which was rare at that time when I saw the show. Canadian podcasts weren't really highlighted as Canadian. But really, it was all about that imposter syndrome part. That little girl's uncertainty that I have that still lingers inside of me, even as I am a 45-year-old woman today, right? Like, all of this stuff comes up. And it came up through that one question, the title of her podcast. So I added, But What Do I Know?, to my list, even though I didn't listen to it. Not in the beginning, at least, because I wasn't ready to face my inner struggles with that little girl that I was talking about, right? That struggle of, I actually have to look at this now? Nah, but I'll still save it on my podcast player because you just never know, right? And then I fast forward to last year, 2024, and the podcast was rebranded. And it spoke to me even more. I was like, wait a minute, why did this rebrand happen? What's different? What's going on? And it piqued my curiosity. So I was like, okay, leaning towards the curiosity versus, do I have to face my inner demons? And that was the change for me. And I decided to hit play because I realized, what do I know? Because I could learn from Chidinma Azubuike. Chidinma and I chat about her podcasting journey and what success looks like for her now. Because, as we know, podcasting is a lot of work. So how does her curiosity and drive to build community work for her podcast today? This is episode number 97 on the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. So let's go! Chidinma, thank you so much for joining me on the show, because when I saw the title of your show, But What Do I Know?, I say that to myself all the time. It's like, but what do I know? What do I know? And I just really connected with you on that. And then the fact that we're both Canadian, a lot of Canadian shows don't get highlighted as Canadian. So I'm really, really glad that you agreed to come on and chat with me today.
Yes. No, thank you so much for having me, Mary. I really do appreciate it. And yes, but what do I know is the story of my life and the story of the phase of life that I'm currently in. And when I landed on that name for the podcast, I was like, this is so good.
Yeah, because when I started my podcast production and consulting company, I had almost 20 years of radio background, but still I was doing the whole, but what do I know? It's podcasting. It's different. It's not radio. What can I do? What can I share? I don't know. It's just, I kept saying that. So, so connected with you over this.
Yeah. It just so represents just all the questioning. I think it's been a really good place for me to all the questions about any aspect of life. Like, my main pillars for the podcast are, finances, wellness, and relationships of all different types. So whenever, whatever I'm sort of thinking, I honestly think of my episodes based on that. I'm going through a period of questioning my finances. Then I'm like, oh, let's have a conversation about that. But what do I know about how to build up my savings? But what do I know about how to invest more and stuff like that? So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So walk me through that process. You're like, okay, I'm having this trouble or challenge in my life.
Yeah.
What does that look like in terms of then building out a podcast episode and figuring out who a guest to bring on and all of that? Walk me through the whole process.
So it's really curiosity driven, I guess. And what I usually do, and now it's become, I guess, a well-oiled machine, if I do say so myself. And so what I'll do is at the beginning of every season, so in January, my seasons typically run from March to December. Now I have an editor on the team, so thankfully I won't have to take that 2-month break. We can cut it down to 1 month. But what I do is in January, I will, just sit, kind of reflect, journal a bit, and think of the different topics that I want to cover for that season. So, and again, it's related to whatever I'm going through. It's related to life. It's related to something maybe my girlfriends are asking me about. Like right now, I had a little bit of like a pre-launch event with a couple of women, and the common themes were hair, especially for Black women. It's hair and hair extensions, our braiding hair. Can you get someone to talk about that? And I was like, okay, cool. Questions have been like hair care or balancing or how to build a sustainable creative business, like stuff like that are comments that I get. And of course, people love conversations around relationships, whether it's relationships with your family or, dating is always gonna pull people's attention. So when I kind of brainstorm them, I also have sort of like an admin coordinator slash social media coordinator as well. She helped me sort of brainstorm some ideas and helps me manage socials right now as well. So the team is growing. But yeah, so we'll make a list of topics and then we'll start searching up guests through either Google or socials are really good, especially TikTok and IG, because they help me to get a gauge of the person's personality and character and if they'll be a good fit for the podcast. And so, we'll search, we'll kind of do some tags, we'll search by like if we're looking for, let's say, like a business coach, we'll type in like business coach, and my podcast is for women of color primarily. So I'll type in, business coach, WOC, and IG is pretty great with all the tags and filters. I'll end up finding somebody that fits the profile. And then once we find someone, it's now a matter of reaching out, pitching, sending that email that includes, the stats for the podcast and generally what we're about. And then it's a couple of back and forths with the potential guest before we then lock in a date. And then closer to our recording date, I'll send instructions, important instructions, like you need a wired headset. I'm not doing the Bluetooth
Oh gosh, no.
headsets anymore. Please don't show up. But like, no, that's not acceptable.
That isn't.
Like conversations, topics, things like that. I used to do, and I still do sometimes, like a pre call before we record just to get to meet the guest and warm up a little bit. But sometimes if you're a repeat guest or if I kind of have a sense of who you are or you have a podcast yourself, we can kind of skip that phase. And then, yeah, and then we get to the time we record. And then once we record, it's now on that post-production end and marketing. But yeah, that's the process.
You were saying that, the team's growing, you have some people working with you
Yeah.
too, but I'm sure like most people, when they start this podcast, like you started in 2020,
Yeah.
it was a one-woman show, is my guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a one-woman show. I had another person. She's a good friend of mine, went to school together. She's a great graphic designer. And so we went to school for like urban planning, urban design together. So she really tapped into her design for me. Okay. Yeah, she designed like the initial iteration of the logo, and she also created the cover art. She wasn't a photographer, but she was at my rebrand photo shoot for the current cover of the podcast right
Oh,
now, cover
nice.
art. Yeah. So Haley is her name. She has been with me through like day one. But in terms of producing the podcast, it was just me. So I was doing the research. I was reaching out to guests. I was recording. I was producing. I was cutting reels. I was posting. And initially, I chose podcasting because it's audio. Like a podcast is an audio format. But now, people want to introduce video. People want to call video shows podcasts.
Yes.
They're not. Okay. Let's just get that clear.
It's a
They're
video
not.
show.
It's a video show. But I understand that y'all want me to do video so you can push my content. I get that. But I am not. I'm not the biggest fan of that. Like I chose podcasting for a reason because I didn't want to feel pressured about, your image on camera and looking good all the time and presenting and performing in a certain way. It has definitely made it a little bit harder, but I'm grateful because now I can tap into an audience on YouTube, right? As we start to grow that way. But yeah, it's definitely come a long way. Yeah.
So why the rebrand though? I know there was rebrand in the middle there. What
Yeah.
was that deciding factor to make that happen?
The rebrand was in the beginning of 2024, last year. Yes. So the rebrand was because the initial cover art was not a cartoon, but it was like an animated cover art. Like it didn't have my face. Yeah, it was to represent me, but it didn't have my face. And I felt like, you know what? I've done this for 3 years. I'm on video now. I'm showing my face. I'm confident. And I wanted something that was a little bit more bold, more like fierce on the cover. And so I feel like the current cover really represents that, and I just look fire.
Yeah, it looks great.
Right. But I felt like, yeah, I think it took time for me to kind of get like step into that. And so last year was the perfect time to kind of rebrand. I also wanted people to see the cover and see who they would be listening to. And so yeah, that was sort of the cause for that.
Did you change anything about the show instead of just the cover?
What I did, I think when I did that subconsciously and maybe a little bit consciously, I think I started to become more personal. When you start a podcast, and depending on who you are, for me, this was the case. I felt like I had to put on like a professional voice,
Oh,
quote
yeah.
unquote,
Yeah.
and I didn't because I didn't want to fall into the trap of having a podcast where it was quote unquote just two friends chatting ish or just chilling. And I was like, I'm not just like, I feel like people don't take those podcasts seriously. So to combat that, I felt like I had to, maybe like sound uber professional or like sound like I was like I did like research for certain topics and stuff. I still do, but it's just a lot more like personable now. Like my personality is really showing through. I'm not afraid to like cuss here and there because you're getting me. You're getting the full person. You're getting my stories now. You're getting more of me, right? So I think that is what I would say, especially 20, like ending of 2023, 2024, you really start to see that. Like 2022, 2023, you got bits, but towards the end of 2023 and 2024, it was like, yes. And even more so this year. This year, just by virtue of where I'm at in life, the things that myself and my girlfriends are dealing with, a lot of our conversations are being more vulnerable. Like we're talking about friendship breakups where I was the one that made a mistake. We're talking about, relationships and having to end them. We're talking about me, losing my job due to the market, and we're combating and tackling those things, right? I like it because then the audience gets to connect with not just the material, but with me, but still in a healthy way because I'm never going to get on the mic and say, this is what I did. You should do it too. This is for information. This is storytelling and a little bit of entertainment too, right? But I think that podcasting is a healthy medium to where people trust the voice because I've been doing this for so long and I've been doing it based on research and having experts and reputable like girlfriends come on and we talk about it and we're doing it earnestly. We're not doing it maliciously. Like I'm never going to get on the mic and start chatting ish and not citing sources and stuff, right? So yeah, I think that that's been really really something that I have focused on.
I can hear it too in like the
Yeah.
different segments that you have and
Yes.
how you are. Yeah. And in your most recent episode, you talk about losing your job. And that's very personal. But
Yeah.
you walked around that to be like, hey, let's talk about this when I'm ready to do it. It is your show. So I feel like there is a lot of community that you've built. But describe to me when your podcast really became like a community for you and had an impact for you. What does that mean?
I think 2024 as well. I think when I did the rebrand, I pushed myself to do a pre-launch for that season and I invited about 10 women listeners. Some of them were also podcasters themselves. And we did a pre-launch party where we watched 15 minutes of an episode that was to come. And I revealed the cover art. So they got to see the cover art before anybody else. And we just like talked about what the podcast season was going to look like. That was step one. And then I think as much as social media has made it a little bit harder now in terms of reach and engagement, just showing up regularly, people are consistently seeing like, oh, she's serious about this. And people are, commenting, sharing, and they're also encouraging me. And I honestly think we might need to have this conversation again next year because I think this year is when I'm really pushing myself to solidify the community aspect. So like we have an upcoming movie screening for a Black Canadian film. Yeah, Village Keeper. And I can actually share this if that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's on May 29th in the evening and I'm sharing all about it on socials. So you can, catch that there or if you listen to the most recent episodes of the podcast, the link is in the episode description. But yeah, we're screening that and it's virtual. And so now I'm kind of testing myself to say, okay, who feels connected to the conversations that we're having on the podcast? Who wants to show up? Because with podcasting, it's very passive. So it's one thing to have people listen to you and enjoy the conversation. It's another thing to have people start coming to events or to want to pay for content or to leave their house and show up for in-person events, right? So now I'm really seeing it. Like one of the first things was I thought I could make a Discord for our community. And I made a Discord actually. And then like a couple of people joined. And then it was like I was hearing from a lot of women that like, you know what, I actually don't have want to make a Discord. I don't want to join a Discord. It's another app. Some
Yeah,
people are like,
it's
I'm
true.
married. I have too many apps. And I was
Yep.
like, okay, I hear it. So you know what? It seems like for my community, newsletters would be good. So now I'm working on newsletters. So you're gonna get a newsletter monthly about episodes and any events coming up, and then we're just gonna keep using IG like Instagram, and have the IG community function, and then give out notifications there. And I've made that group really small, and I'm inviting certain accounts that I know engage with the podcast. So those are things that I'm trying. I'm also noticing that like I have to say things multiple times on the podcast for people
Oh,
to
yes.
take action. Like that's just it is what it is. On Instagram, because I've been showing up so much, even though reach is reduced, people will still kind of, complete a survey or a poll. So that has also been helpful too, in terms of like getting surveys about what the community wants. Like people are saying that they want events, people want community events, virtual. They want to feel like they're connected with other listeners. So people do want these things. I just think that with podcasting, it is a little harder because it's a passive medium. It's not like YouTube where while you're watching it, you're typing your comments and
Yeah.
you're going back and forth. Like it's very much like I don't see the account that's listening to this, especially if it's Apple Podcasts. Like I just see that someone is listening. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the challenge that podcasters have is that, like you said, it is passive. It feels like a one-way street conversation where you're just talking behind the mic and then you got to wait a while before you hear back from the community.
Exactly.
And also, like you said, you just have to repeat yourself a lot. And that is part of the audio medium. When I worked on radio, we were always told the best audio, it has to be repeated 7 times in order for someone to get that into their brain. And even
Mm-hmm.
then, so because of that repetition, they might not need something right away, but because it's in their brain, when they do need it in that moment, they'll think of you and they'll think of
Yeah.
what you've said so far and really want to work with you. And so I think that's why a lot of people that start a podcast and they use it for a marketing purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have a weekly show or bi-weekly show or whatever, you're in people's brains, you're in people's minds and hearts and ears. And so when they think of, oh, I need this, I'm going to work with the podcaster that I've been listening to the whole time. But you were saying to me too that you also monetize your podcasts. So you do
Yeah.
make money, which is different from just using it as a marketing piece for your brand. So walk me through that and what does that look like for you in terms of what does success look like for you?
Okay. So in terms of, I guess, building the brand, I personally didn't care for building a personal brand because right now I still have, a work life outside of the podcast. And I didn't see myself. I still don't necessarily see myself and the things that I do as a brand. And I'm not interested in developing like a personal influencer type of brand on
Right.
socials. I am more so interested in building my platform, and you can kind of know me through the podcast. That's what I'm more so interested in, right? So that's that. So with that, in terms of then monetizing that, podcast monetization is so different from other, I guess, more visual influencer work because depending on what brand you're working with, you're not necessarily coming on Instagram to show, like, you're not doing like a get ready with me with this makeup brand. You're reading an ad on the podcast. And so, what has worked or is working for me is working with agencies or working with a network to connect me with brands. A lot of them are American and they're bigger because they have marketing budgets. And they're not the like beauty brands that people, some of them are, but they're not the beauty brands that, you see on Instagram, but they're lifestyle brands. They'll be like your Cozy Earth. Of course, everyone who has ever listened to a podcast has probably heard of like BetterHelp, and there's like Squarespace and Earnin, who I work with, Cozy Earth I've worked with. So I look out for brands that are like lifestyle, wellness, functionality, like finance, sort of like education of finance, help apps, like, apps where it can keep you on track with your finances, stuff like that. Those are the brands and companies I find have the budget that can pay for multiple episodes. Like, I don't want to work with a brand if you're going to ask me to read an ad for one episode. That makes no
Yeah,
sense to
like I
me.
said, we need that repetition.
Exactly. It needs to be at least 3 and or honestly 5 if we're being honest. And so yeah, so that's working. I think right now a lot of my like brand partnerships or ad campaigns are like 3 figures. I just landed a 4-figure one, like a good 4-figure one, which I'm like, "Ooh, from one brand, great. Let's get the ball rolling, right?" And then on top of that, what also works is if you host your podcast on platforms like Red Circle, Acast, Megaphone, they will drop ads into your podcast and you go in and you can kind of like set certain like ad locations on your podcast. And so because I host my podcast on Megaphone under a network, Spotify will just drop ads there based on my ad location. And so far my average for that has been like 300 to 400 a month, which is not bad,
Nice. That is
right?
not bad.
Yeah. So with that, plus like the brand stuff here and there, that's like I'm doing okay. But again, podcasting, I mean, influencing in general and content creation, it does take time to be able to work with brands. Like it really is relationship building. Like the 4-figure deal I said I just landed, it was because I worked with that brand last year and they only sponsored 3 episodes. But this year they want to do it from like May to like almost the end of the year. So, like it obviously results in a higher amount. But yeah, it's a lot of relationship building, it's a lot of touch points, a lot of emails. And unfortunately, from my experience, right? Because again, I work with agencies in the US that connect me to some of these brands like through my network. But on the local level, I have tried and I even like paid someone who was just part-time with me. She was helping me like do like brand outreach. I have found that Canadian brands just don't seem to have money or they don't seem to understand how podcasting can be important for their marketing strategy. So a lot of times you're setting meetings up and it's like, hey, I had one with this beauty brand and we're actually going to do a collaboration together. So I'm not going to say what it is.
Yeah.
And they're great, but they're a B Corp. So they don't have a lot of money to put towards marketing right now. And then I had another brand, and even without saying if they had money or not, it was like, hey, we can give you listeners like a free trial. And I was like, I'm looking for money. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems like Canadian brands so far are just more conservative in spending. And that is in our nature. Like if you compare US and Canada, like US, people are consumers, but they are also very entrepreneurial in spirit. So people are not, I feel like people are a little bit bolder in their spending, especially when it comes to things like ads, content. People do it because they see that that is business, like that is
Yeah.
work, right? And they spend the money because they make the money through, entrepreneurial things or their own business. And they're just more advantageous when it comes to business, content, entrepreneurship in the States versus here. We hold our hands a little bit tighter because we don't see a lot of opportunities. So we're reserved in how we spend. And so I don't blame the brands for being conservative with how they spend in terms of marketing. I just wish that, they would take the risk to just be like, okay, if I give you like $500 to 1K, sponsor 3, 4 episodes, let's see what you do,
Hmm.
but we'll see.
Yeah, that's the Canadian market has always been a tougher market to
Yep.
crack even in the broadcast world, it's a totally different market, and Canadians were slower to learn about and use podcasting as a listener. So yeah, we're slowly seeing us spend a little bit more just because there was more awareness, but because we started so low, that spend amount is still going to be so much lower than the US.
Exactly. Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind is the CPM, which is like the cost per mile, but it really is just like the cost the brand is paying you per thousand listens on that particular episode or on your podcast overall. I think the industry standard right now was like 25. So some companies, I think it's like 20 to 20. Oh, I don't want to lie to your listeners, but I've seen 25. I've worked with 28. I've worked with 21. And my lesson that I'm learning is if I'm working with an agency and they have to take a cut,
Yep.
I'm doing my best to negotiate for at least 25 per thousand. It gets harder because then if you're a podcaster and you're not making like, you're not getting 10,000 downloads a month, like that math will just feel really discouraging. Like
Yeah.
$25 for every thousand. So if you get 5,000 a month, then you're getting, 25 times 5. What is that? Like 100 and something a month. So it could feel a little bit discouraging. But if you have like 40,000 downloads a month or like 30,000, which is where I'm at, then it's a bit more a month,
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And I think that's where a lot of listeners worry about the monetizing bit, right? Because you
mhm.
do need those numbers to back it up. And for even agencies to even want to start working with you is to have the numbers. But it's not all about the numbers, right? For you, it's also about building that community aspect. So, how do you then refocus on the community stuff so it's not always going to be about finances and money, money, money?
Exactly. And I think so. Honestly, the most realistic and honest answer that I can give for that is it takes money to run this thing. So, as much as I love the community aspect, I still need to be able to sustain this. But what I'm trying my best to do is to not rely on my community for the money. Like, I do want to start a Patreon, but again, people are just coming around to the concept of paying for content. So it'll be hard. I think like that's that's another leap. And so I think for me, I'm really pushing to get my money for the podcast and my media work from companies and brands and sponsors so that the listeners and my community can either attend events for free, listen to content for free, and then in-person events or some virtual offerings will be like at an affordable rate. And maybe in a year I'll change my mind because, the business strategy has changed, but I'm trying to not depend on my community for money. I just feel like that's harder. So
Especially when your community is also talking about finances and struggling and,
exactly.
losing their jobs and all this stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, especially when you started out, let's look back, reflect. What has really surprised you with the podcast?
Oh, that's a good question. Hmm, I feel like my growth to a certain extent has surprised me. I think when I first started, I really worried that people weren't going to want to listen because it's not a pop culture podcast. And even though like I basically do like edutainment, like I'm educating you, but I'm also like entertaining you, right? And I was worried that we weren't going to like, it wasn't going to seem like it was fun enough that people could listen to for an hour. But I was, you know, greatly, I was wrong. And I'm so happy I was wrong. And so I think the growth really surprised me, but I think the amount of work surprised me. And the amount of work continues to surprise like it doesn't surprise me now, but it just continues to increase, especially with each level that you get to where I'm like, damn, like in 2020, I really just thought like record, do a little bit of editing, put it out. Record, do a little bit of editing, put it out. And that was okay for like 20 for people who started way back, like 2011, 2012, that was fine because it wasn't that like saturated or wasn't there weren't that many people starting podcasts back then, even up until I want to say like 2018, 2019. But from 2019 when Spotify started telling everybody, hey, you get a
Yeah.
bag and you get a bag,
Yeah.
exclusive deal for you. That's when people were like, oh, I want to start a podcast too. And then every like it just like it was like the amount of work that it took to separate yourself increased. Now you needed video, now you needed Instagram pages and TikTok pages for sure. Now you might need a website for SEO. Now you need a team. You need someone to help you on send out emails to guests. You need someone to help you with socials. You need a graphic designer. You need someone to help you on Canva. Like, yeah, the amount of work, whew, yeah.
I know. I loved like in the beginning when I saw like all the celebrity podcasts come in. And at first I was like, oh man, you just do we need another celebrity podcast? But then I was like, but wait, they're growing the industry. The industry itself is being well known, and then you see shows actually center around podcasting, but then it's like, oh, every mother and their dog now has a podcast, and it, like you said, does saturate the market. But I loved seeing how the industry has grown and has been accepted as like the norm. And even today, I
Yes.
read a headline like the Golden Globes is going to now give out a
Mm.
podcast award.
Wow. Because I know like there's the Podcast Academy already. Like there's the Podcast Academy, which is like, I guess, like the podcast equivalent of Grammys. So they give out podcast
Yeah.
awards. And then, of course, you have the Signal Awards, which we won one. Thank God. There's so
Yay.
many different awards for podcasting that don't just have to be like podcasting award. Like we also won a communicator award last year in
Oh,
2024.
sweet.
And I was like, oh, okay, because you're communicating on the mic. I was like, this is wow, wild. That's another thing that
Yeah.
shocked me, like the awards, right? And so my next one that I am looking out for is like maybe the Webbies when we grow a bit more, and the Podcast Academy one. I definitely have my eye on those. But yeah, like I'm so grateful that people are seeing podcasting as work, and it takes a
Yes,
team,
exactly.
and so that's why unfortunately, sometimes you see bigger networks and companies betting on people that already have a name so that they can bring an
Yeah,
audience.
exactly. And that's why there are so many celebrity podcasts.
Exactly.
So, aside from the awards and that stuff that we had just talked about, what else are you really excited about podcasting right now?
Ooh, honestly, so on like a micro level, I'm honestly excited to just put out my next episode. I feel like the next one is really, really great. We get deeper into like my, current life update with work and everything. So in this space that I am, I'm getting re-excited about like the episodes and recording and putting them out and just people hearing them. Like that is really exciting to me. I also think last year I was more like head down and my 9 to 5 was really busy. So I didn't really get to go out. But this year I would like to see if I could attend more like in-person podcasts and events. Like I'm excited to meet other podcasts. I recently have attended a couple of networking events here in Toronto that I've related to podcasting, like the podcast summit. And there was another sort of like more exclusive one. But I'm hoping to get out to like the podcast movements and the big ones. Maybe one. I know there's one in August. Hopefully, I can get out to that one. We'll see. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I love that you were saying the micro, because at the core of podcasting really is recording those episodes, right?
Yeah.
They are just talking. And then, yeah, in the broader sense of meeting other podcasters. And I have the same buzzy feeling too. Like, I just want to get out and see people again. And I'm thinking about checking out Pod Summit YYC in Calgary this year. It's in September. And yeah, seeing that the Canadian aspect of the industry growing as well. And so that's not all focused on the US and always going to the States for podcast movement and evolutions and all that stuff, which is great, but also seeing the Canadian side grow. So maybe I'll catch you in person at one of these events one day.
Yes. Yes. Fingers crossed. I hope we do.
So on that, thank you so much, Chidinma, for joining me. This has been such a fun conversation to get into the insights of your show. And I could ask you about a whole bunch of other things that I'm like, oh, I need to know more about this and that, but another time.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Let me know. I'm definitely open to having more conversations about this. I feel like it's so helpful for, upcoming podcasters, current podcasters, even just listeners to know, how they can support the podcast that they listen to, right? So
Exactly.
thank you so much for having me on. This was so great, Mary. I do really, really appreciate it.
What I'm really struck by, Chidinma, is that evolution, not just for the podcast itself, and the rebrand and everything, but the evolution of herself, her confidence, yet still staying humble to always asking, yeah, but what do I know? I appreciate that she reminds me that we're always learning, no matter where we are on this podcasting journey. We learn from each other. We learn from the process of just doing and from the product itself, the podcast. There will always be turning points in life, and it's using that curiosity to figure out what the next steps can be, and that she's willing to try and experiment. Sometimes after you produce a show for so many seasons, it's easy to just sit back and keep doing the thing that you always do, right? It's like, oh, I've done this before. This is easy. I'll just do steps A, B, and C. Podcast is done. But I love that Chidinma is always looking to learn and grow alongside her podcast with her listeners. So whether you're just starting your podcast or you're looking to grow and monetize like she did, but when it comes down to it, a podcast really is about your listeners. So it's what she's doing on her show for and with her community. And like I said on the episode, and I've said many times on this podcast, it's not about you. It's not about you as the host, or it's not about you if you're a guest. It is about the listener. And for Chidinma, it's her community. And being curious to find the next topic or theme to help her community grow, not only in growing her community numbers in that sense, but to grow in each listener's own learning journey. So thank you again to Chidinma for being here and sharing her podcasting journey, and especially learning. I get to learn from someone who's brought success on her own terms. So in the next episode, let's continue this idea of curiosity. I'm going to ask the question, how does curiosity play a significant role in your podcast, especially for interviews? I started thinking about this because I had a conversation with my daughter, and like I've always said before too, a lot of my work is intertwined, right? It's not just about podcasting, but it's life and how does that work with the podcast and family, and everything is just connected. And this is part of the show prep stuff that I always learn from radio. Things you do on the day-to-day can be brought to life on the podcast. And so I want to bring this idea that my daughter and I had about asking questions to bring out stories that you want to hear, to be a stronger storyteller, and to have really in-depth conversations. So when you become curious, your conversations have the potential to be really, really juicy. So I'll catch you next time on the show. Thank you so much for listening to the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a podcasting friend. And to reveal more voicing and podcasting tips, click on over to visiblevoicepodcast.com. Until next time.